With us now to talk, Shanlon Wu, former federal prosecutor and current immersion congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome back to both of you.
Good to see you, Victor.
Good to see you, Victor.
Shane, let me start with you. The president's team, they presented these 6 points on which they say they will base their defense of the president, and they started with a heavy emphasis on the summary of the July 25th call, talking about, as we heard from Sarah Murray, no direct, clear quid pro quo there. What do you think of day one and that framework?
Well, I thought that actually they were kind of weak on day one. Understandable, because they have a very heavy-handed client that they have to appease. And when you have a client that's a real micromanager, a lot of your argument strategy gets kind of hijacked. And I think that was reflected. They were kind of jumping all over the place. I thought Scipione was very weak, opened up. He had to address the truth issue, meaning the president's telling the truth, he's innocent, but then he quickly kind of got sidetracked on process. Same thing with those 6 points. 6 is just way too many. It's like by the time he got to number 4, it's like, you know, your eyes are already glazing over. So I think they did what they had to do. It was really important not to leave the weekend with the jury just having the other side, the prosecution's argument. So they did what they needed to do, but I wasn't too impressed with the overall performance.
Karin, the point that they made several times, although saying they weren't going to repeat themselves, what they repeated was what the House managers did not present. One thing they didn't talk about in the summary of the call was Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney. 5 mentions in 5 pages. They will have to justify at some point his role, will they not?
Well, I mean, it's their time to determine who they want to talk about and what points of the call they want to highlight, because that is that 5 pages has been a central part of both the prosecution and the defense's arguments. So if they want to kind of skip over the Rudy Giuliani stuff, there's nobody to actually hold them to task during the time that they have on the floor to do so. It's possible to object, but we didn't see the Trump defense team object when the prosecutors were presenting their case, and it's unlikely we'll see the prosecutors object during the defense's time. But in general, they're probably going to have to be ready to answer questions like this down the line. The senators will get a chance to ask direct questions, and you can be sure that you'll see a lot of cross-currents for parts of the argument that each side feels was left out. But for the duration, basically, they are trying to make the case that anything that did happen was on the up and up and is being misinterpreted by the Democrats from the House, who are, there was an accusation yesterday that they are trying to be mind readers and put motivations in to the president's mind and those of others that didn't exist there, and that is basically how they're approaching this. Giuliani has always been a bit of a problematic person for the Republicans to explain, but in general, the tack that the Trump's defense and his close confidants have taken is, look, he can take advice from whoever he wants, and you don't have to, you don't maybe agree with it, you don't like it, but he's allowed to solicit advice from whoever he thinks should give it, and that was something that was mentioned in passing during the defense's opening hours yesterday. We'll see how far they choose to lean into that, or if they just kind of choose to leave it at that level of you don't have the right to criticize the president, asking his lawyer what he thinks.
Arguments continue tomorrow, and Alan Dershowitz, who's on the president's defense team, he spoke with Anderson Cooper last night, giving a bit of a preview of his framework and what he'll present. Shan, this question goes to you. Let's watch the professor.
What I'm going to argue on Monday is that it's precisely what the framers did not intend, that is to remove a duly elected president from office and prevent him from running again based on vague, open-ended, and entirely subjective criteria like abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The framers feared that those kinds of open-ended criteria would turn us into a British-type parliamentary democracy.
Shan, vague, open-ended, entirely subjective criteria. You say what about that? His, for lack of a better term, framing of the framers.
Well, he is prepared just to get a law classroom lecture tomorrow, and he'll do fine with that. But in terms of his interpretation, I have to respectfully disagree. I mean, all the Constitution does is it lays out a very specific mechanism. The House impeaches, the Senate tries. There's really not much else that can be discerned except from the legislative history. It's clear the framers did not want presidents impeached for maladministration, meaning doing a really crummy job. The rest of it is all Professor Dershowitz's spin on it, saying this is too vague or ambiguous. It doesn't say anything like that in the Constitution. It doesn't go to, can when you have witnesses. It just gives that mechanism. So he can give his views on it, and he can spend as much time as he wants researching old dusty books, I think, as he put it, but that's not going to change what's actually in the Constitution.
Karin, let's talk about part of the argument that we know now will be coming, and that is that Ukraine potentially interfered in the 2016 election. At least that's what we heard from the president's attorneys. I want you to hear first from Jay Sekulow and then from FBI Director Chris Wray. This was from an interview about 6 weeks ago about what the FBI found as it relates to their involvement in the 2016 vote. Watch.
The House managers, in over a 23-hour period, kept pushing this false dichotomy that it was either Russia or Ukraine, but not both.
We have no information that indicates the Ukraine interfered with the 2016 presidential election.
Now, Karin, Senator Kennedy has vacillated here on this Ukrainian interference theory, but for the rest of the Republican senators, what position does that potentially put them in if the team goes down this road?
Well, look, Senator Kennedy was not the only Republican to say, look, we don't know if Ukraine interfered. Certainly Russia interfered. I think you've seen the GOP rally around the idea that, like, don't tell us that we aren't saying Russia interfered. Yes, Russia interfered in the 2016 election, but there's lots of interference that could have happened from others, too. Just because Russia didn't doesn't mean that others didn't. I think that you're seeing an equating here, though, when that argument is made between a fairly covert operation that the Russians did that was planned out, that seemed to be orchestrated from very high up circles with Putin's blessing, to opinions that heads of state and top-ranking politicians in Ukraine were giving openly, which is kind of a different style of thing, but a lot of Republicans are saying, well, both count as interference. I think that the issue that you're going to have right here is something that Chairman Schiff pointed out after the defense was done yesterday, which is just that if you're going to talk about interference and you're talking about the transcript, the reference that's being made by the president in the transcript is to the CrowdStrike server, which is the DNC hack, which it's pretty clear that was Russia and Ukraine was not involved in that. So it's going to be interesting to see how the defense makes the case that there could have been Ukrainian interference too that weighed on the president's mind when the president is raising an instance that was not Ukrainian interference, it was Russian interference. And I think you're going to hear a lot of talking about that outside the chamber as well as inside too.
Karin Demerjen, Shanlon Wu, argument continues tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Good to see you.
And be